The Delaware Raritan Canal stands as a monument to a time past. The story of the canal is the story of the Industrial Revolution in the state of New Jersey. Author Linda Barth has written several books on the Delaware Raritan Canal.
I grew up along the canal in Southbound Brook. It was part of my growing up. Friends of mine used to ice skate on it, so it was always around. And when I was growing up, my brother was allowed to swim in the canal. I, of course, was never allowed to swim in the canal. In fact, there was, for about 1 year, a sandy beach along the path. I don't remember that, but I've seen pictures of it. After World War II, my father took an old airplane fuel tank, cut it in half, made the floats for a catamaran, put some boards in between. This picture shows my grandmother with my parents in 1946, a few months before I was born, so I was on the canal before I was even born. Canal digging started in 1830, was open for business 1834, and continued until 1932. The company was chartered by the state. It was the Delaware and Raritan Canal Company. Soon thereafter, it was merged with the Camden and Amboy Railroad to make the joint companies. It was actually dug by a lot of different people, local as well as foreign-born. We have contracts where people would get a particular stretch to do. They would do a mile, or they would build a lock. The chief engineer was Canvas White, who got his training on the Erie Canal, as we had no engineering schools. And just as the canal was opening, he passed away and was succeeded by Ashbel Welch of Lambertville. Equipment was muscle power, picks and shovels, animals pulling scoops. No bulldozers, no steam shovels, no mechanical equipment.
Many lives were lost during the building of the canal.
It wasn't all that dangerous digging. It was dangerous when an epidemic like cholera would start and there was nothing to prevent it from traveling from one person to another and sickening hundreds of people, because the conditions they were living in were not particularly sanitary. They were living in group camps, so it was very easy for illnesses to be carried from one person to another. There was a cholera epidemic in 1832, and hundreds of people died. We're not sure where they're all buried. There are stories that some are buried in Griggstown, but it's hard to say because they were probably just in mass graves. I would say, other than that, the dangerous part would be moving the heavy stones, using black powder to quarry the stones, moving the heavy stones to build the locks.
Who were the workers that built the canal?
A lot of them were local people, some were Irish, some came from other countries. Canal recruiters met a lot of the boats in New York in order to recruit immigrants. But I would not say there were only Irish who dug the canal. That would be an incorrect statement, although you will hear that a lot.
Water is supplied to the canal by a feeder canal that runs along the Delaware River.
The feeder canal's job is to bring Delaware River water to fill the main canal. That's what it's always done. Water enters the canal at Bull's Island above Stockton and flows by gravity down to Trenton. There it fills the southern end to Bordentown and the other downstream end all the way to New Brunswick. There were mainly two very important employees. The lock tender was in charge of operating the lock to raise or lower vessels. The bridge tenders, of which there were many, were in charge of swinging all the bridges to the side. There were a few that lifted, but generally they all swung to the side this way. They had their own homes given to them by the canal company, so they would always be on site. Their families often helped them also. But those two, bridge tender and lock tender, were the most important. Of course, there were maintenance people also who would come up and repair things. The lock is kind of a water elevator. It's a stone chamber with gates on each end, and it raises or lowers boats as the terrain around the canal rises or falls. So the boat would float in, the gates would be closed on both ends, and water would either be let out through gravity or let in through gravity to raise or lower the boats. And the lock keeper would be in charge of monitoring that operation, opening the paddles to let water in or out, and opening the gates to let the vessels in or out. The house in Blackwell's Mills is lovingly cared for by some volunteers. It is one of the properties of the Meadows Foundation, which manages property that Franklin Township owns. And the Blackwell's Mills Canal House is taken care of by a wonderful group of volunteers. They raise money by having events every month, and they really take care of the house. After the flood of Hurricane Floyd in 1999, they immediately found people to clean up the mud and the mold and get it back in action. There aren't a whole lot that still remain. We would like to see the one at East Millstone on Amwell Road restored. The one at Griggstown still stands, but no one is living in it at the moment since Hurricane Floyd. The one at Weston may be a little interpretive site, but it is not going to be a home for anyone because of its location and condition. And we hope that some of the canal houses in Trenton will find a good use. Usually the canal boat would be owned by a family, not always, but usually it would be a family business. Dad would either hire or buy mules, whose job it was to tow the boats along the canal. The mules would have their own towpath for walking alongside the canal and towing the boats. Boats went in both directions. There was a procedure for passing so that the ropes would not get tangled. Because the DNR was very wide and because the sides were stone-lined, steam vessels came early to the canal, but mule-pulled vessels were used just about throughout its life. Other canals that were narrower, like the Morris Canal in North Jersey, only used mule-pulled boats and never had steam-powered vessels. But the DNR, because it was wide, had a huge range of vessels coming from all different parts of the East Coast, not any one particular kind of boat.
During the 19th century, industry flourished along the Delaware Raritan Canal.
Canal was very important to the economy, especially the two big cities at just about either end, Trenton and New Brunswick. Their industries used the canal all the time for transportation, along with the railroad. But the canal was vital for bringing products in and out, and for the small towns in between, it was vital for bringing supplies from the outside world. Once you had a connection to the outside world, say to the Port of New York, which the canal basically was that connection, you could get anywhere. If you had the canal in your backyard, you could then boat to New York and go throughout the world. And products that normally you could never have gotten because you were inland, now, by canal, you could get those products. Anthracite coal was the chief product coming from the northeastern Pennsylvania coal fields, shipped to Philadelphia and to New York and to the markets in between, the towns in between that needed it. But also many farm products, stone, terracotta. The Atlantic Terracotta Company grew by leaps and bounds at Rocky Hill, had up to 300 employees, and manufactured ornamental clay tiles, which were used in such buildings as the Woolworth Building in New York and the Philadelphia Art Museum and many other buildings around the Raritan River area. Trap Rock has several quarries along the canal, one along the feeder, maybe two along the feeder, and now, of course, depends on dump trucks, but did use the canal extensively to transport stone.
While some parts of the canal were preserved over time, other parts of the canal were not so lucky and were lost to urban redevelopment projects.
Well, we should go back to 1871. At that time, the Pennsylvania Railroad leased the canal for 999 years, not because they particularly wanted a canal, but they wanted the right-of-way and facilities along for their railroad. Eventually, of course, the railroad became more profitable, the canal was not maintained well, and the canal eventually went into deficit. The charter said that if the canal did not operate for 3 consecutive years, it would become the property of the state of New Jersey, and that is what happened when it closed in 1932. So within 3 years, the Trenton section was deeded to the city by the state of New Jersey, used, filled in, made for a road, then later taken apart and filled in to make another road, Route 129, which is covering the right-of-way today. The canal does not flow under 129. It does flow under Route 1. The section in Bordentown now has no real connection to the rest of the canal, although eventually the section in Bordentown will be developed by the state as more people-friendly part of the park. The canal became a state park in 1974. And at that point, things started to be improved. Before, recreation was informal. People used it because it was in their neighborhood. But once it became a state park, then plans went ahead to improve the surface for bikers and walkers, and to improve just the whole area, make picnic areas. There's a group called the DNR Canal Watch, which is kind of a friends group. It raises money specifically for the state park. And among the things that the watch buys would be benches, great new interpretive signage, and whatever the park office says they need. If they need a new camera or new maps, that can be supplied, because we know the state park budget is usually kind of thin. So we're happy to help. The Canal Watch raises most of the money through a 5K run held early in the spring every year at Washington Crossing.
What organizations can you join to get involved with the preservation of the Delaware and Raritan Canal?
1, join the DNR Canal Watch, P.O. Box 2, Rocky Hill. And 2, join the Canal Society of New Jersey, P.O. Box 737, Morristown. Or come look at either website, canalwatch.org or canalsocietynj.org, and we'll be happy to give you all the information you need and help you become a member.
With the help of people who care, the canal can continue to be enjoyed and teach its history to many future generations.